This is not the first time I've found myself in kind of a weird place when it comes to a rumination, because I'm not 100% sure what to talk about when it comes to ruminating on a comedy. I mean, I can't just sit here and repeat the jokes, right? See, one of the mentalities I walk into these things with is, and I've said this many times, and I'll keep saying it until, everyone knows about it. I've just finished playing / watching such a thing, and now I've gone to my friends and we're chatting about it. It's whatever my mind picked up that I thought was worth talking about, worth discussing, worth analyzing. And that's the general approach, the attitude, if you will, that I have walking into these things. So the problem is, if I just finished watching a funny movie or whatever, or played a funny game, I'd be like, oh God, the friggin' ghost town, right? With the and then there was that bit with the IRS stamp, which is still the funniest joke in the whole game. Just stuff like that, and they'd, we'd share the laughs. So I kind of had to shift my view a little bit here and think of it more in terms of a game. Hopefully I'll do a better job than the Spaceballs rumination, which I can't remember if that's actually gone live yet or not, but I've already done it, obviously, from my perspective. So, without further ado, I'm going to talk about the humor in the story first, because ultimately, it's actually the thing I have the least to talk about. It's well designed. There's a lot of good humor and there's a lot of good writing. During the stream, we compared it more to South Park than something like, say, Undertale or Earthbound. Well, there's some obvious parallels, and I will be paralleling this game to Earthbound in the future. The truth is that those games are far more serious. Their core story is very serious and very dark and very mature, with wacky, silly humor kind of helping to make it more swallowable, kind of a Dragon Quest effect sort of a thing. This is a comedy. Word one, word go. This is here to make you laugh, and that's fine. But it's a different animal. It's a different way to think about it. The game liked to rapid fire jokes at you, and I have to admit that this is the game. I would like actually to play this game again in the future, because there's other ways to do things. But this is the kind of game where it's better to just kind of sit and enjoy it and just react to the jokes, and then maybe take a break for a while, right? Let your mind relax from the pun storm, and maybe get a little bit of a degauss, or maybe go do something else, and then come back to it, like a chill game. Which is funny, because near as I can tell, that's how Kingdom of Loathing is designed to be played. Not that I've played Kingdom of Loathing. In fact, I'd only heard of it when I was actually setting up for this run. There are two jokes I really wanted to mention. I've already mentioned one of them, the IRS joke, but the other is the tombstone pizza. You see, there's this horrible pepperoni moss that grows on gravestones, but if you harvest it, you get a tombstone pizza. Anywho, so let's talk about the game, because this is a really well-designed game. This is how I want to parallel it to Earthbound. Now, if I said this game was like Earthbound, most people would probably react, and I do know one person who reacted in this way, in the manner such of presuming that it's a quirky, silly, funny game, and that's not even remotely what I mean. What I mean is Earthbound was surprisingly ahead of its time in several ways, as I feel like I've discussed several times, and as we'll discuss when we get to streaming it somewhat soonish. It had a lot of good game design decisions. While the graphics were kind of old and clunky and very Dragon Questy, and the combat was frankly lackluster, there's a lot of good under-the-hood design. Under the hood's the wrong word. There's just a lot of good design on display. A lot of good decisions and choices and convenience features and options and blah, 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 blah. And that's this game. You gain experience, which just goes into a pool, which you can then spend on directly raising things. I don't know if there's an official term for this kind of leveling system, but it's actually my personal favorite leveling system. I admit I mentally think of it as the Asheron's Call system, because that's what they did in Asheron's Call, and it's a fantastic system. It means you have total control over what you raise, when and how and why. It is fully put onto the player, but it also very much encourages builds, because unless you're doing absolutely ludicrous levels of grinding, which you can do in AC and in this game, you can't raise everything, right? You can't max everything. You can't be an Omni. And so it kind of fills that same similar slot that Elder Scrolls games try to fit, and sometimes do and sometimes don't. As I'll be talking about in some videos that'll be going live soonish, I'm pretty sure, I tend to really like build-oriented gameplay. And to describe that briefly, in case you don't know what I'm talking about, a build is when you have to select you've got your options for leveling or for equipping or for selecting talents or whatever it is that the game has. And you can't pick everything. That's an important part. And certain things mesh well with each other, kind of combo over each other. That's another critical part. Thus, you have a build. You know, it's like making a deck in Magic the Gathering, or setting up a combo or a setup or whatever in Guild Wars 1, for example. That's build gameplay, and I love guild gameplay. I love sitting down and figuring out what works, why, and how, and whatever. That's the kind of thing I eat up. And this game has that. You pick your starting class, but then you pick, okay, well, how do you want to focus that, and which abilities do you want to really raise? And you can get new abilities as you go throughout the game, which also give you other options. And then, of course, there are the feats you can get, and just all sorts of things that allow you differing gameplay styles. The main way I was pushing through was I had Susie with me, who was most of my deeps. I also got Buffalo Bill later, which helped out substantially. But my big thing was summoning snakes. I went with the alchemist dude, and while I had some other things I could do like healing or buffing, I dumped points into the snakes so that they would be the bulk of my force, and I would spend most of my turns just summoning snakes. It worked quite well for the most part. The only downside, of course, is snakes do muscle damage. But that's okay, because snakes do muscle, Susie does moxie, and Buffalo Bill does generic. He does typeless, effective percentage damage, actually. So I had most of my bases covered. And that was the build I went for. And near as I can tell, there's a lot of other options, and that's what I like about that. The game also has a very good... it makes a lot of good decisions with regards to its combat. So I've talked many times about how I actually like the idea of what Final Fantasy XIII did with its combat, but I feel it executed other aspects of it badly. This game does combat better than FF13. You can quote me on that one. That is, of course, just my opinion. The main similarity is that combat is a contained resource for the most part. Your AP, your abilities, any cooldowns that are applicable, and your HP, all of that is reset at the end of each combat round. So the only time you ever find yourself actually worrying about combat is within the confines of that specific encounter. In other words, and you might be thinking, why is that a good thing? Well, it's not necessarily a universally good thing. It's just something that can be well done, because what it does is it allows the player to go full tilt constantly. There's no reason to hold back at all, not except with regards to like item usage, because their HP is going to be refilled, because their AP is going to be refilled, or their MP is going to be refilled in a particular thing. So what that means then is the game designer can design each combat to be particular to trying to push a specific envelope, like trying to... It allows them to balance it better, and it's clear they did that in this game. There are several random encounters which were brutal, but I managed to get through them because anybody who dies other than the main character, well, they just get right back up at the end of fight. And, you know, I just was burning AP trying to get them down because I knew that would be refilled at the end of the fight too. It changes how you approach it. Now, obviously, the resource management aspect of doing a dungeon and trying to make sure you have enough HP and MP and items and cooldowns and spells in order to get through that is a different type of gameplay. But I still like this type of gameplay, and I just wanted to give that praise, especially since, as I said, it does it better than FF13. There's another little feature that's kind of tacked onto this, though. The game has an interesting approach to failure. And by interesting, I mean brilliant. So what happens is if you fail, you get angry. If you're angry, then your stats go up. All your main stats, which affect all of your main damage and your defenses as well, since muscle, moxie, and mysticality affect how much you do and how much you take simultaneously, which is another good design decision, by the way. So what that means is you are now better and stronger because you just died. And you're thinking, well, how's that a penalty for failure? Because you can only take so many deaths, your anger can only go so high before you get too angry and pass out, which resets the day. Resetting the day sends you all the way back to town, wipes your buffs completely to the board, and basically starts you over. Now, you still retain progress as to a thing, but it's effectively the do the level over option. And like I said, it wipes out all your existing buffs, and considering how powerful food, potion, and alcohol buffs are in this game, that's kind of a big deal. It's a great system because while it still penalizes you for failing, it gives you a little bit of basically bad luck protection. If the fight didn't go well because they targeted the wrong guy, or maybe both mobs went before you and just hit you and killed you instantly, it's a little way to kind of help mitigate that and give you another shot before you actually end up having to start over. In effect, the anger system is like lives if lives gave you like an automatic mushroom at the start of the next level, you know? It's a very fascinating system. I also really like the flow of how the quests work, the almost minimal backtracking. The fact that you generally only get one encounter per overworld trip, and even then only if you already meet the requirements. So at a certain point, the first area, the second area, the third area, after a while you've done them all, other than the randomly generated fight ones. So it reduces those encounters, which reduces padding and filler. Someone on stream said something, and I forgive me, I didn't write down who it was, but this is a very vertical game rather than a very horizontal game. Or to put it differently, this game built tall. It's not a long game. I mean, even doing basically everything I could as I was going and reading out loud, which was slowing me down substantially, I still blazed through this game in 8 hours or whatever it was, or maybe 12 hours. I don't know. I'll look up the number later because I don't have it in front of me. But it was pretty short. But there's a lot of density in there and a lot of different ways you can do it. So, good density and good replay value, which leads me to the final thing this game did really, really well, and the thing I want to gush about, and that is the quest design. All roads lead to Rome is what I call this quest design, because the way it works is you start here and you end there, but how you go between those two spots has multiple permutations or design options depending on what you want to do. Probably the first game that really introduced me to this concept was actually Elder Scrolls Oblivion, which I tend to really enjoy the quests in that game because there's a lot of ways you can go through them and a lot of different ways you can settle them and solve them. But I praise this type of quest design because it puts so much of the agency in your hands and allows you, it so neatly fits with things like replayability, because you can try out different methods in the future, and builds, because what you're good at changes based on your build, and thus the quests may have different things that accommodate your particular setup. And this game has that in spades. I was casual looking up a few things for an unrelated thing in this game. There was a lot of additional options and possibilities that I hadn't even considered going through this game. Lots and lots of ways to get through stuff, which is awesome for the reasons I already mentioned. All of these things combined make this an absolute treat to play through, and that's ignoring the humor factor, which is obviously going to be the main draw for a lot of people. I don't have universal praise. The interface has some issues. One of the biggest things that came up was the fact that I had trouble, especially in the larger mobs when I was fighting 4 large enemies. It was actually hard to see their HP values, and for some reason I had trouble targeting them at certain times. It was weird. I was playing on the PC, for reference. I know this is available on Switch and a few other things, but anyways. But I had some trouble with that. And there were a few moments that are a little bit walkthrough-itis-y, notably in the manor. Now, I want to talk about the manor separately, because the gun manor feels like a completely separate design approach to the rest of the game, because it's a Metroid game. Now, I know what you're thinking. Lore, you're dumb and stupid, and you are absolutely right. However, the problem here is that I think I'm actually right on this case. See, the way I think of a Metroid game is like a slowly expanding... This is the dumbest analogy I've ever used. Imagine the levels, the world of a Metroid game as a series of pipes, and there's different ways to move through there. And so as you progress through the game, the amount of areas you can access and reach slowly expands as the water is pushing through the pipes. I know, terrible analogy, like I said, but that's how it fits in my head. That's how I play a Metroid game. I kind of keep a mental checklist of, okay, I want to check this and this and this and this and this, because I need this and this and this and this and this. And it's like, aha, I found the beans, which means I can go and cook them with the chili powder to give to this guy, which means I can then use this and blah, blah, blah. It expands, and that's how the manor was kind of designed. Was you could slowly make your way through, and you could peek into several paths, but you couldn't complete them on your initial branch because you didn't have whatever they needed. And so you figure out what you need, and you push through, and it was awesome. With a couple of exceptions. Having to smother the chili with a pillow was not what I would call intuitive, especially since it's a pillow that didn't even pop up initially. I had to go way into the corner to get the prompt. And there were a couple of other little tidbits. In fact, the lawyer quest, which was actually awesome, ignoring the obvious Ace Attorney joke there, which was great. The lawyer quest is the only quest of all of them that requires you to completely leave the DLC and go do something else and then come back. Which, you're probably thinking, who cares? Well, the problem is the entire manner up to that point, and this is basically the ultimate, the final quest in that area, has been everything you need is here. Everything you require to do this DLC is in the DLC. So I was in that mentality because that's how it was designed, until suddenly I had to go leave and I had to look that one up. Like I said, few minor issues, but overall still good, and like I said, still funny. Objection. The last thing I want to comment on is the resource utilization. This is the kind of game I want to make. Now, you're probably thinking, lore. And I'm like, yes, I know, dumb and stupid, I get it. But what I mean by that is I want to push for games that can be good within the limitations of what I have. Now, don't mistake me, it'd be awesome to make a full 3D awesome game with amazing, fantastico graphics and motion capture animation and just all that wonderful stuff. That'd be great. But over here in Reality Land, one of the things that has been slowly getting more and more appealing to me, partially because it's more possible, but also because the creative challenge is trying to make do with limitations. There's a movie that I believe the Rumination on it has not gone live yet. I'm pretty sure it's going to be later this year. It's called Primer. I'm not going to spoil anything about it, other than the fact that that movie had a budget of like a couple $1,000s. Absolutely pathetic budget. But it's a really good movie. Because what they did was they sat down and they said, okay, well, we can't use special effects, we can't do fancy location shots, and we can't do big sets, and we can't do props, and we can't do posts, so what can we do? And that's exactly what this game did. Because both things, what they did was they said, okay, we're limited in doing the flashy, fancy stuff. So instead, they allocated all their resources towards the parts where it mattered. Game design and story. And the story obviously being the humor in this case. But as I think I've made my case, the game design is still very good. There's still actually legitimately good game design out of this. And it takes time and effort and money in order to design a quest that has 5 different ways to get through it, depending on your build and your setup and what you happen to have found or held on to. That takes time and effort and money, which generally speaking can be put towards other things. Like, you see why I'm bringing this up? What they did with this game was they very smartly used their resources to make a game it's a stick figure game that is a very good game underneath that. I can understand why we don't see so many of these. I had several people pop into chat during the stream, and a friend of mine had the same reaction to this. And the reaction was basically, wow, this looks like an old Flash game. And it's sort of an automatic negative, right? And that's probably because there's just so much crap when it comes to Flash games. Newgrounds back in the day, what was that? Oh, the Rhino? Shoot, I can't remember what it is anymore. There's another one, or there was another one. I can't blame people for having that opinion, but that opinion makes so much sense for why companies are hesitant to do this kind of a thing. For why they look at this and say, no, we need it to look good, we need to look fancy, or at the very least very stylized, which is a thing that's becoming more and more popular in recent years. That way, there's a very clear, visual aesthetic to it that people can be appealed to, and then maybe we'll design a good game underneath that. And occasionally there is a good game designed underneath that. Not always. So I don't blame companies for not doing that, but I really feel like there's a lot of potential for basically allocating all of the time and budget that you have into working on the core game and the core story elements, and allowing the game itself to not exactly be all that flashy or that fancy in terms of presentation or design or whatever, yet still being a very core, good game. Does that make any sense? I'm probably explaining myself terribly here. This is something that's been in my head a lot. Lore Reloaded, who's a wonderful man, he and I have had brief discussions about doing like how we could accomplish how he could accomplish a television show with basically an absolute shoestring budget. And the ideas just kind of started sparking in my head, sparking the creativity part of my brain, like, oh, well, you could do this and this and this. And one of the big things, for example, just to talk about, is you can use sound effects to emulate things that you can't otherwise see. Now, that doesn't apply to this game linearly, except it does. They don't use sound effects. What they use is text. A lot of the things that were not, they basically didn't have the ability to properly show through animation or whatever, they would narrate. There's this bit where you can go to a cave and there's some bandits there and you can go and fight them and capture them. Or you can go nearby, break open a door which leads to a giant spider and then leave. And as you're on the way back, a narration bubble pops up which describes the spider going out and, well, you know, it's okay, they live. They're going to be eaten later, and that's when you can go capture them. But they couldn't show, my point is they couldn't show that in a cutscene. The game and the design and the approach and the animation and the graphics and the time and the money didn't really sit there to have the cutscene like you'd have in a proper AAA game, or even a AA game. So instead, they used the narration to describe in wonderfully horrific detail exactly what's happening, and it worked. And it's the same thing like for other games or for shows or movies. You know, you use sounds. We may not be able to show someone being phasered to death by a Klingon, but we could have someone speaking Klingon in the background and have the phaser effect and have the scream and have it happen off camera and show someone's reaction to it. And obviously that's not going to apply universally. There is a time and a place for special effects, and there's a good reason for that. But you can see why this game tickled my creativity so much, in addition to the fact that I enjoyed playing it. And hopefully we'll enjoy replaying it. I'm probably going to buy it on the Switch, just so I have a portable version of it, and one I can, you know, play with comfort. But I guess that's actually all I have to talk about. I hope you've enjoyed my thoughts on West of Loathing. I will see you guys next time.